Okay. So, right, the question. So you mentioned how Aristotle complains that the Platonists deal too generally with the virtues and with ethics, that the four cardinal virtues are too general, and that you should subdivide, and you should compare it with you can compare each virtue, for instance, with the two opposing vices. And so I don't really know where they explicitly adopt that kind of discourse. So, I mean, like we saw, for instance, in uh, Porphyry's on virtue, we saw that, like, for instance, he went into some more detail about what purification is supposed to entail and how you're supposed to go about that. And, Porphyry, and they're like individual discussions of some issues, like Porphyry again has discussions about um, vegetarianism, right? Um, and there are things like um, the life of Pythagoras that Iamblichus writes. I mean, part of the idea of writing these lives is also that they're somehow ethical models. And so he discusses like the virtue of friendship there. But in general, no, it doesn't really seem to become like a genre that they start doing or that they address. However, they do use Aristotle for their own teaching, right? There's this idea that you should study Aristotle before you study Plato, and they also use Stoic texts, right? So Simplicius writes a commentary on Epictetus' Manual. So it seems that they had, that said, okay, yeah, this is like a good contribution, so we'll use it as well. And I mean, I'm not really sure why they themselves didn't like go into more detailed things. Maybe part of the concern is there's this concern in Plato's dialogues, right? Like in the Republic and also in the Statesman, that you shouldn't legislate in too much detail, right? That you shouldn't set down to. Of course, there he's talking about legislation and, actual laws that are binding. Because basically it's like there's some things that you have to teach people by bringing them up properly, by giving them good role models, and not necessarily giving rules like "Hey, you have to do this and all that." And also that in any case, in order for you to judge properly a situation, you need to have nous, and no rule will be able to capture that. And these are properly are arguments against legislation, but I could imagine someone saying, well, for that reason too, you shouldn't get too hung up in formulating a detailed moral philosophy in that sense, right? Because
Hmm.
whatever you write ends up becoming a rule for someone else, right? Um, and so yeah, that's what those are my thoughts on the matter.
Hmm. Okay. But is there like a theoretical criticism in that? Like you could say, okay, it doesn't like there's the practical criticism also, which is like in the Aristotle's criticism of the form of the good. Like maybe it's true, but it doesn't seem like anyone could build a table by looking at the form of the good. And then
Mm.
there's something similar for all these virtues, like, well, just telling me act according to reason and not according to appetite, okay, but like doesn't seem to be very helpful. Um, but there might be also like a theoretical criticism, like something like virtue doesn't consist of that. Like that's not even the correct definition. It consists of all this long lists that there might not even be a definite list, just like a whole bunch of things. And like it consists in each kind of domain, like in each kind of action separately. I mean, there's like the unity of the virtues discussion, but like in reality, the virtues turn out to be like very domain limited things. Like there's the virtue has to do with money and has to do with little money and has to do with a lot of money, and they're separate. And there's like this seems like a criticism of like this over generalization of like virtue is keeping all your parts equal or acting according to wisdom, all these things. Um, is there like a
Uh,
so is there a response to that, or is there like a discussion of this? Is this a real problem, or is it just something he says because
I mean, it doesn't seem to be like I don't know of discussions where they're answering this kind of complaint, so I tend to think that. the attitude is, yeah, sure, you can be more detailed. We'll use your text. That's fine. Something like
Mm,
that.
okay.
So now we're going to get this general survey on the virtues, which is going to point us to many different dialogues. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to pick up all the um, like all the passages that he mentions here. But it'll give us a like an overview in some in way that's similar to how Marinus's um, life gave us an overview of also the whole scale of virtues.
Hmm.
Um, so do you want to start with 138?
Yeah, 138. Okay. So, first among the virtues are their natural virtues, which we have in common with the animals and which are inextricably linked with the bodily temperament and frequently clash with each other. Um, so, one virtue can clash with each other in these. Either they belong mainly to the animate body, or they are reflexes of reason when not impeded by temperamental disorder. So they might belong entirely to the body, like the living body, or they might be something to do with reason. Not sure what reflexes of reason means. Or a third way, they might be to routine acquired in a previous life. Okay, that's a Platonic explanation. Plato discusses them in the Statesman and in the Laws.
Right. So remember that when Marinus discussed things about like natural virtue, he had in mind things like Proclus looks good and he has a healthy body and things like of that order. So they and so in that sense, we can see how they can mainly belong to the animate body. The reflexes of reason when not impeded by temperamental disorder. So presumably the idea is something like, um, I mean, I can more easily understand the temperamental disorder than the reflex of reason. So the
Mhm.
temperamental disorder is something like this person has a tendency to become irritated, to get angry, right? Or this person has a tendency to melancholy, right? And then in that sense, that's as it were we could say, well, these are natural vices, right? And it has nothing to do with upbringing or how they think. It's just like their body lacks this hormone or this body lacks doesn't produce enough of this or something like that. But they talk about it in terms of the humors, right? Bodily humors, something like that. And so presumably when you, however, are lucky enough to have like a body that you have your blood and your bile and everything um well balanced, right? So you don't have a temperamental disorder, you have a temperamental order, then you're more naturally like spontaneously act like a rational being. I guess that's the idea. And um the right, the routine acquired in a previous life is curious, especially because there's a an adjective that he uses a single adjective for acquired in a previous life. It's probiotic. So it's like there's something that's from the previous life. Um, Now the statesman, right? So the statesman discusses. It's interesting that he brings in the statesman because the statesman discusses like that there are people who are naturally more aggressive and that they're naturally more gentle, and that you need both kinds of people in the city, and so you need to and so the good statesman needs to somehow like get to the people who are gentle and the people who are aggressive to like make a city together, and also they need to like even like marry each other and things so that he makes one good united city. And the laws in general, it has lots to do with upbringing and also uh, there are the things that are like there are like these we talk about predispositions in the bodies. Something else is like it says that we share it in common with animals, right? And so, for instance, there's an association of like courage with a lion, right? Even though the Thumos is pictured as a lion, as an internal lion in the Republic, and being social with like bees and ants and so on. So these, of course, could be the previous lives that you're coming from with these good dispositions. But it also shows how, you can have like natural virtues in the sense that they're somehow like inborn tendencies, but they're not virtues proper, right? Because you can have one without the other. So like you can be kind of like fearless, but it's not rational. And therefore, like if you don't check it, it could even become temerity. But basically, you have a good predisposition to develop later courage, right? So that would be this idea of natural virtues, right? So it would be like predispositions to virtue that are in the body, and that since they're just predispositions to virtue, if they're left unchecked by reason, if they're not developed, then of course they can clash with each other. But and you can clash, and people can clash because they have different predispositions to different virtues. But so they don't enjoy the unity of the virtues, because the unity of the virtues, as like when Socrates argues for it in the dialogues, it's always because, well, you need wisdom to practice any virtue. And so if you have one virtue, you have wisdom, so you have all the virtues, right? And so since these are prior to that, they can clash with each other.
Hmm.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Um, um, then the previous lives thing makes it somewhat really connected to virtue, right? Because if you say, well, somehow randomly nature gives different bodies different predispositions, then you didn't do anything good to do that, or no, there's no choice in that. If you say, well, it's because in the previous life you acted well or something like that, then it somehow makes that more into human virtue.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And we could see like, and indeed, I mean, like the theory of of transmigration means that we choose our life. So we choose all these predispositions, and we choose it according to the habits. The habits are what carry over after we die. So yeah, so they're like petrified virtues, or the consequences of virtues, or vices, right? In the previous life. Yeah.
Like it turns out that this whole transmigration thing is just like a grand scale version of their regular habituation to virtue, like from the ethics, like the second nature,
Sure, sure.
like very literal second nature.
Yeah, then now you have a second nature. I mean, I guess the point, because like part of the point of the transmigration is that you're responsible for your whole life, right? So if you believe the stuff that the soul is self-moving and that it's free, then it can't, you have to be responsible for the whole life, even the contingent bits. And so you have to have picked this life. And what are you going to pick it on? You're going to pick it on based on other lives you've lived. Um, and the Right. So there is a sense in which it makes the whole of our life ethical, and then we can also understand a bit more why these are called virtues. Right.
Right. But the other things, maybe like beauty or things like that, like physical beauty, they're still, or health. I mean, those are still going to be just conditions or something.
Yeah, although you also I guess it really depends what habits produce picking a beautiful body or picking a healthy body,
Hmm.
I guess. Because since it's habits, and it's like the transmigration doesn't punish you. And it also doesn't give you what you necessarily want. It gives you what you did, right? Because like it's seen by the so-called punishments, because they're just confirmations of what you were. So like if you were predatory to people, you become a wolf, right? If you um and if you were really social with people, you become a bee. So what habits would make you into, a beautiful person? I guess it would be habits that, that like a beautiful person with a beautiful body and like a nice looking face. It would be someone who, in some sense, really maybe was pleasant to other people, something
Hmm.
like that. So yeah, that's interesting thinking about this uh yeah, this inherited fortune as it were the symbol of the previous life in all kinds of ways. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
shall we go on?
Like in I don't know to what extent this happens in Platonism, like in all the Jewish discussions of transmigration, all are there for theodicy reasons. Like it's oh something happened bad, turns out you're responsible for in a previous life. Like it gets almost entirely subsumed under this like kind of responding to the good people having bad things happen to them and say, well, they're good people in this life, but apparently in last life they weren't such good people.
Yeah, I don't think that that's the Platonic view, because I think that the next life just confirms what your tendencies of the previous life. So, and I think that, yes, it's not that punishment. I know it also has like this cosmological function of explaining how animals come to be. Um, so I don't think that I don't think that's the idea.
Yeah, maybe that the rabbinic Jews are very prioritizing reward and punishment as like this big somehow thing.
Yeah.
And then
Hmm.
there's even the thought, I mean, there's like the thought that transmigration is like the worst punishment you could give for a soul because souls don't really want to come back to earth.
Oh, that's interesting. Because then here there's the idea is that you never actually really exit transmigration. You only exit it temporarily. Yeah, because it's the nature of the
Right.
soul to keep cycling. And And there's worse. Like between lives, you can get stuck in Tartarus, and that's the worst. So, yeah.
Right. That's maybe we're off subject, but like, yeah, it's probably like the later, like people like Cordivero and Arizal think of transmigration. I mean, sometimes as a worse thing than hell or something like that, because in hell you're not in your body, or at least not in your this body. You might be in a body like the astral body, but therefore that turns out to be the worst thing. Although it's useful because you could become better. You can't become better in hell. You can just like burn away your sins or whatever, but you can't become better. If you come back to this world, you can become better, but it's still from the perspective of the soul who doesn't like being in a body. It's worse. I think that that's what happens.
About like bad things happening to good people, Proclus generally talks about that like, well, it's because it's not so much because of the previous lives, but because you are part of these larger wholes. You're part of your family, you're part of your city, you're part of the human race. And these can have pollution, these can have done bad things. And so punishing you is like an accident. The point is to purify the whole, to like do a surgery on the whole.
Mm.
And um, whereas, yeah, I mean, I think you might mention also like, oh, transmigration in passing, but I think the main thing here is like for why do bad things happen to good people? It's more about you're part of these bigger wholes.
Hmm. Yeah. Like I think the Baal Shem Tov came up with this thought that like maybe even if you stole from someone in a previous life and you never returned it, so when you come back you could return the and that's why we see people stealing and it's not fear, but it's really they're returning the theft from the previous life. So it's very hard to judge even like monetary disputes because you got to know who owes who from the previous lives. That might be very far.
Well, like if someone stole from you now, it could be because you stole from them.
Yeah, something like that.
That would make it complicated to judge. It's, uh, yeah. But that's interesting. Yeah, that the Platonic transmigration doesn't seem to work like that.
Yeah, this seems very literal, a little maybe too.
And also it's because like there, it's you're not picking the life, it doesn't seem. It's like, oh, like God makes sure that you get stolen again.
Yeah, something like that.
Whereas here it's like you die, but you still want to be in a body, and so you pick a body in a life that will be similar to what you want, right? So you'll continue.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So 139?
Yeah, I'll continue. So 139. Above them, so beyond the natural virtues, are the ethical virtues, which we acquire by habituation and by a sort of true opinion. They are the virtues of well-bred. Uh, oops, it's getting stuck again. They are the virtues of well-bred children. Okay, and they're also found in certain animals. So some animals have these. What are these ethical virtues? Not sure what that is now. Um, Being beyond the influence of temperament, they do not clash with each other. So some animals have like practical wisdom or something.
Yeah.
Uh, Plato deals with them in the laws. They belong to reason and to the irrational faculties simultaneously.
Right. So these can be, um, this discussion of just upbringing. He mentions the laws here, but like it's also in Plato and Republic, uh, 3 or 4, is it, when he's discussing the upbringing of children and how they have to have good role models. That's why they have to listen to the right stories and play with the right games. And um and so that gives them a true opinion, right? The or correct opinion. The Greek word here is orthodoxy. So they don't know why, let's say, they should, you know, uh, they should not try to, face a robber, but, just give him what he wants and avoid the worst. But they know, like, oh, that is the right thing to do. So this is, in some sense, you're just habituated to do the right thing at the right time. And certain animals, and I wonder if this is domesticated animals, right? Or maybe, but there are also cases of Plato talking about animals as having mentioned the bees and the ants. But he also talks about the stork somehow, perhaps having null reason in some sense. So there are like ideas that some animals can behave in ways that seem to indicate that they have some kind of wisdom. There's the example of the dog. Well, it's a domesticated animal, but it's an important example of the dog in the Republic. Right? He's a model of um, for the philosopher because he likes whoever he knows and he doesn't like the things that he doesn't know.
Mm.
Um, and so, and again, they're beyond the influence of temperament, and so they're beyond they don't clash with each other. So because the others had to do with maybe you having, for instance, you're a more energetic person, and therefore you have, more initiative, and this is a predisposition to like act and when necessary, then that's a predisposition towards virtue. But since it's about having, as it were, an imbalance, or having more of one thing than another, it's about a mixture, then there's always you're going to have some and you're going to lose another. It's about mixture, a mixture in your body. Whereas here, they're no longer opposed to each other because they are um, not, they're just about training, right? So there's some sense that, it's in some sense reason coming from outside and not this mixture. And that makes it that they all agree with each other. Um, And the laws it talks about, for instance, like it goes into some detail about the education of boys and girls, the dances that they have to do, and like how will they be trained to not drink too much and all that. So it goes into that in some detail.
Okay.
So I guess
And
that's why
this
he's mentioning
makes like you think with animals that you could train animals also. Like they have some kind
it.
of
Yeah,
habituation and then they become like they have this kind of virtue. Like the dog is a good watchman or something or whatever.
I think so. I think that's probably the best interpretation. They're also subject to training.
Hmm. Right, and I guess the point would be something like that where next we have the civic virtues. Something like these virtues, like a dog or a child cannot ever know. Like that's the point of true opinion, right? They cannot know, or Aristotle would say they can't choose the virtues, right? They can't know why it's good to be in
It-
this way,
yeah,
but they know like this is how we act or something.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so that's why these are, as it were, just a true opinion. And um yeah, so like ethical, of course, using ethical here is like a really bad translation because like nowadays everything that has to do with virtues is ethical. And these are the ethical virtues. The others are unethical? No. But it's um it's because in Greek ethical has to do with habituation, right? So like say like these are the habitual virtues, or well then you say like well every virtue has to do with habituation, but this is just habituation, right? So it's the trained virtue, something like that.
Right. That was like Aristotle's etymology, right? Like habitus has to do with sorry, ethic, ethos, and something like
Yeah.
that. Um, okay, so that's these something like you could have in habit. All right, so like there's also an ethical sense, right? Besides for like the not knowledge makes all the virtues in this level be not like Aristotle would say you don't properly have the virtue, you're just how does he call it? Something like continent or practicing or something because you don't know them. So you're not really good. It's just that you're good, you're somewhat secondary goods relative to who taught you or something like that.
Yeah, and observe that these two, the natural and the ethical, these weren't in Plotinus and Porphyry, right? They're later developments, and I guess um, part of the motivation is to see, well, where is this coming from? Like, what are the basis of virtues? You're not, working on a blank slate. Part of the motivation here is also to see virtues on every level of reality. And so there should be virtues on the level of the body and um, maybe also the ethical. yeah, I mean, the ethical virtues, that wouldn't be another level of reality, but it's something intermediate, uh, second nature or something like that. So I think that there's also like this metaphysical idea of finding them on every level of reality. He's going to underline later about how the virtues are also all grounded in the gods. So maybe the idea, this goes hand in hand with the idea that there's, something divine in every level of reality as well. So there should be some kind of virtue in every level of reality.
There should be something even lower, like the uh
The, yeah,
the natural virtue is still of a living body. You could say like there's strength in your bones, which is just virtue of the whatever matter it's made of, like the virtue of a house or something.
right. And there should be something lower, which is like the eugenics programs in like the Republic, right? So presumably that's in service of the natural virtue, but that's actually something, that they presuppose even, right? That people are getting married and things like that. So yeah, you could think that that would be a prior thing. Yeah.
Mhm. Right, that whole program proposes yes, presupposes like that there's like the Republic's whole eugenics is very much presupposes this natural disposition certain things. Like
Exactly, and
we have
it's
to
and
breed humans like we breed horses and all of that.
yeah, and it has to do with these with then what would be the matter of the natural virtues. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Um, that's interesting because like hmm, we didn't discuss if the Neoplatonists like are planning to do the eugenics program or not.
We didn't discuss that. No, we didn't. Um, uh, Proclus has this in the Alcibiades commentary. So the Alcibiades, it starts with this big speech by Socrates saying, "Oh, Alcibiades, I finally decided to talk to you because my diamond has let you, whereas you've ignored all your other lovers because you think you're so great because of all these issues." And one of the issues that why Alcibiades thinks he is so great is his lineage, right? He's well born. So Proclus comments on this, and then he says, actually, there is no like being truly well born has to do with that your soul belongs to a hot like a very important planet. Like
Mm.
being truly well born is like your soul belongs to Jupiter instead of Mercury. That's like being truly well born. Um, and so in that text, at least, he's like very um about any like human eugenics. He's very skeptical. And of course that has to do with this idea that um the city of the Republic is the world. The city of the Republic is the world. So if there is a eugenics program, it's actually the gods who are somehow, choosing when and how the souls descend and so on. And that's also how Proclus interprets the number, right? The nuptial number that the guardians get wrong. It's a number that represents like the cycle of souls and the re and their rebirth and the things down here. And the Guardians get it wrong because they do their astrology wrong. He gives a number of astrological rules for choosing when to conceive, and says, the Guardians had to have figured this out. Um, so I think that it's Uh, but of course, like these rules are in some sense, obeyed by nature automatically for him, because that's just the rules that rule conception. So I guess that the eugenics program is ongoing.
Okay. Right. No, my question. So if we bring it back to the question of like natural virtue, because that's where it seems to be interesting. Like a I don't know, Christian or regular religious person would say something like your job starts after God creates the bodies, including their natural dispositions and so on. And there isn't like even I don't know if people I've had this discussion with some I don't know if anyone would like explicitly say this, but like something I mean, obviously people naturally do eugenics in the sense of like trying to marry good partners and they're gonna have good children and so on. Um, but like would like a really like religious kind of person say, well, no, like you could find statements, I'm sure, for every way. Like, it's not your job to make your children good by way of marrying the right person or like something like that. It's your job to educate them, or maybe to educate yourself and to like make good choices in life. But it seems somehow like prior, like in this distinction between what we do and what God does. I would say like God makes your even your ethical dispositions is on God. If you gave a person, a bad humors or whatever, then doesn't make that person worse in any way. Uh, what makes people bad and good, and also what's the I guess the job of educators and parents and so on is only after that. Well, Plato like very explicitly says, well, that's weird. We don't treat dogs that way. Why do we treat humans that way? Like there's something where well, of course, the answer then the person would say no. Well, because dogs don't have virtue, there's only that. But for humans, we can train them, and we don't. Therefore, we don't care about their dog level virtues. Um, but I guess here we're trying to find like a way for to include this in like a complete account of virtue.
Yeah. So I guess one reason why we don't really have Neoplatonic texts about this is that the moral text that we do have from them is training the morally other philosophers, and they're more concerned with convincing them not to marry and not to have sex. Uh, and how to choose how to have well-bred children. So that's one reason why we don't really have this discussion. I mean, so like the eugenics comes both in the next section, like 140, which is the civic, the political virtues, because it would be like a political virtue to marry the right person and that stuff. But then also like the results of the eugenics, those would be these pre-natural virtues, right? And so that would be like level zero. So it shows up both in both cases. Um, I guess, but so Proclus Proclus doesn't cite these rules of conception, and people, astrologically minded people have done this of like, let's try to have sex on these days, conceive on these days because it will be good for our child. And there are even like people who try to like schedule C-sections or delay a birth or anticipate a birth because they want like a certain configuration, right? And so they don't do the choosing your partner thing, but they do like choosing the time of when they do the stuff. Um, and yeah, what you say about like, oh, that's like, oh, it's up to God. Um, yeah, I don't think I mean, that is interesting that like we find the proactive version in the Republic, but in the Credo, we have something where it's like kind of like up to God, where it's like the laws say to Socrates, we are responsible for your birth because your parents got married according to us, right? And they also raised you as a Athenian citizen according to us. So we're your mother, father, and educator. Um, so there's some sense also, and like when I in our class about how Proclus's death was a Socratic death, I brought this up, and I brought this up because it meant some sense that like Athena was responsible for his birth, and because it's like the laws there would Neoplatonically be a stand-in for the daimon of the city and of this family. So there's also a sense in which, this is up to the gods, and that has to do with with this more. as it were, anthropological view of politics that Prague sometimes espouses, which is we're not here to like refound the city and things like that, but the city is like a living organism. And so you like study it like you do biology. You go out there, you study the cities that exist, right? And you study the natural world, you study the social world, all the different cities and families that exist. And they're all, and you marvel at, the wisdom of the gods that have made this social world that, there's war and there's peace and people kill each other and that, but somehow it all works. Somehow, humanity doesn't get wiped out for now. But
Meanwhile,
so, um, yeah, I think that's another, so, and right, and there are like comments by, yeah, even Proclus in the Republic commentary and other Neoplatonic writers like Julian, they have this idea that different peoples, because they have a different mixture, so going back to the natural virtues, they have different tendencies, right? So I forget what they say. I think like Scythians drink a lot and Phoenicians are effeminate and things like this. So that would be an example. And like these national distinctions are one of the arguments for saying there are national gods, right? Because they're somehow like coordinating that. Like, what's the cause for all these different people to have these same common characteristics? It's because there's this daimon that takes care of them. He's literally like their shepherd, following the statesman. So it seems that there's so yeah, so again, this pushes us back to the idea that there is some kind of divine eugenics going on, and so less an idea that it should be your concern, especially because the city whose concern this is, so this is like the knowledge of the Republic is lost with the first degeneration of the city. So this is really knowledge and a concern that's only for the first city. And so that makes sense that it's really only divine uh, eugenics that we have going on.
mm,
Yeah. Okay, so the natural virtues led us to talk about transmigration, and the ethical virtues led us to talk about eugenics. What will the civic virtues lead us to talk about?
we'll find out. 140. Third beyond these are the civic virtues, which belong to reason only. So unlike the ethical virtues, which belong to the rational and irrational simultaneously, these belong to reason only, since they are based on knowledge, but not of reason in regards to itself, but of reason insofar as it regulates irrational being and uses it as its own instrument. So, by prudence, it governs the cognitive faculty. By fortitude, the spirit. By temperance, desire. And altogether, by justice. This is just the Republic. These are treated more fully in the Republic. And they actually imply each other. So it seems like not only do they not clash with each other, but they also imply each other.
Right, so we're getting a new yeah, a high level. So now it's reason, but it's reason. It still has a relation to the irrational because it's regulating the irrational as an instrument. It's interesting that the word here for regulate is osmuntos. So, it's literally it's making a world, an ordered world out of them, right? Well, literally is probably the wrong thing, but like etymologically. Um, and uh, right, and this thing about using the irrational as an instrument, right, that goes back uh to that example of, oh, I'll have a candy to give myself a reward. So, because I know that I need to rest in order be a functional and reasonable human being the rest of the day. Um, so you're still, in some sense, using this idea that oh, a pleasure can be good for you, right? In that sense, you're not entirely in apatheia, all right, detached from it. Um, and also this idea that it uses it as its own instrument. So this connects back to the Alcibiades argument that you are your soul, right? And because how does that work? It's because your body is your instrument, right? So this, I guess, points to how um, the rational virtues, these civic virtues or political, they they are the stepping stone then later to the purificatory virtues. Um, right. And so the first were, as you pointed out, the first can clash, the first don't clash, and these imply each other.
And imply means
That if you have one, you have to have the others, I think. So, whereas, you can have some good habits, but not all good habits. But you can't know what the right thing to do is in a situation. And uh like if you know what the right thing to do is in a situation, that means that you have your whole soul in order in that situation. So you have all the virtues in that situation. I think that's uh
so the previous one would just be something like they do not conflict, meaning like it's not like one virtue like the natural ones sound like something like one virtue can tell you to do the opposite of the other. Like I should be very so-called courageous, but really I should be exercising more prudence or something. Um, the ethical ones won't give you that problem, but you will somehow just still not know what to do or not be good in some situations.
yeah, because the ethical ones are have an external source, right? The ethical ones have an external source, your trainer, right? And since they have one source, your trainer, who is like the agent of reason here, then they all agree in the source. So they're not going to break, like oppose each other. However, your training can be incomplete, right? And then um, so they don't imply each other. If you have one, it doesn't mean that you don't have the others.
Hmm.
The um, in the rational virtues or the civic virtues, um, the source is inside, right? You've learned to figure out on your own what the right thing to do is, right? They're based on knowledge. So now, therefore, they're both united and also they imply each other in the sense that you have to have them all.
Could be. 1 second.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Right. So something like if could you close the door, Bracha? Something like you would not know what to do, so you would like go to your trainer, or maybe if your trainer is inside you, then you would have a problem. But something like I don't know what to do, tell me what to do. That would happen
Yeah,
in the how do you call the
the
ethical
ethical.
virtues. Your civic virtues
Yeah,
somehow
also
know what
because
to do.
all you know is like, oh, this situation doesn't make me feel good, and like you can't draw from that a rule about what to do in other situations, things like
Hmm.
that. Mm.
Okay, and it does. Um, the other question is that we have prudence or wisdom here, um, being separate from like reason, right? So somehow like reason is guiding wisdom or is governing wisdom, something like that.
So, mm, right. And they're both distinguished from the cognitive faculty. Um, but the wisdom here, the prudence is phronesis, okay? So it's practical wisdom, and the because reason here is like very general. It's logos. So it's generally our capacity to give and understand reasons. And so it orders, that's interesting because it says that it orders the irrational faculties. And then we get the cognitive faculty as one of these. So presumably, the cognitive faculty here encompasses things like perception, imagination, and opinion. And so it encompasses irrational faculties. And I mean, it has to have the rational faculties as well, otherwise, reason couldn't touch it. Um, so, and the idea then, presumably, is that you perceive, you pay attention, and you know the right things. That's like what prudent person, he knows what are the morally relevant facts about the situation, right? And in that sense, the right, so the habit of knowing the morally relevant fact is how our general capacity of knowledge is conformed to act to reason in the sense of acting in a responsible way. Right. So I guess those are the way that those three things are distinguished here. Is that plausible to you?
I'm thinking something like we have like the point here is to get this like gradation, right? Like there's the irrational virtues, there's semi-rational virtues, we could call them, and then there's fully rational virtues, still not of reason, but of because it's managing or using um, the rest of the person, and then so this like rational that we're giving the grades of here is not doesn't mean something like your cognitive facilities, because in some sense even ethical are using some of that, like even animals have some cognition and perception and so on. It's talking about something like I don't know how you would say what is correct or something like that.
Right. I think I mean, well, I mean, what's your point about that the animals have it? The animals have it in the sense that they can be trained. So it's still external.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, and you're right that it's more than just cognitive, even because, here it rules over the cognitive faculty. Um, it's probably something like, yeah, our, like, so I spelled it out with our ability to give and uh, be responsive to reasons or to be responsible. So it can also be spelled out as our reflexivity, right? So because the fact that the soul is self-changing means that it chooses the what will be the motives for its action, right? In that sense, of something can be a reason, right? That's why there are reasons, and we're not just pushed by bodies. Um, so that seems to be what the rational part here is. It has to do with the soul's self-changing nature,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right, I'm just getting at like right, right. Reason here isn't like about the like when we have things of virtue consisting in reason controlling desire or something, because that's uh that would like be here, like that would still be I mean it could be even a lower where reason controls without the sort of without having the reason in it or something like that. And even if it is in you, it's still um controlling the correct perceptions or something. It's not that's still not reason itself.
You mean it's not like you're now contrasting, you're now trying to understand this contrast that of reason insofar as it regulates?
Yeah.
Yeah, so um yeah, it's so yeah, this is not reason like doing mathematics. Um or reason as a you're right, theoretical reason, which will come up later. Um so it is our self-changing, but so it's our being like agents of change. We choose where we choose and what we're responsible for what happens to us. Um, but yeah, in some sense, it's somehow here it's is still taking the let's say what the information given from the irrational part as part of its um part of its reasoning. So the point is like it's doing all this for the sake of the irrational being, right? So right, like, oh, it has to avoid pain and it needs pleasure. And so it's making this into a well-functioning, well-ordered whole. Um, whereas the pure reason, like what we'll get in the next section, will not take into that account at all, right? It'll just take like what does it need um to exist, right? And what does it need? Not as it were, doesn't no longer takes into account the well-being and the flourishing of the irrational being.
Hmm. Okay.
So like the in the ethical, the trainer is outside you. In the civic, the trainer is inside you. In the purificatory, um, let's say in the and what does it mean to say inside you? It means that you are the trainer. And the purificatory, you're not training anymore, right? Or you're living your life, and the animal does what it does.
Okay. Right. I guess the like the reason I'm a little stuck, like this distinction is what where like Plato and also earlier were mostly concerned with, like the difference between the civic and the purifying and above them.
Mhm.
Since we like elaborated the civic or what's lower than it into all these three levels at least, it becomes a little more complicated.
Why do you feel that the new levels of ethical and natural complicate
Because
this?
something like we had the hmm, not sure. Maybe like a simpler way of saying this, like we said before, like the difference between all these levels is what is being perfected or what is being good, and then
Hmm.
and then the natural one is just the body, and the ethical one is like this capacity for having habits or something like that. Um, the civic one then is sort of the person, right? What we call a person,
Right, the soul
and
body compound. Right.
right, and the purificatory one is like the soul, something like that.
Yeah, like that can make sense. Yeah, that's a different way to see them. That distinguishes them. Oh, I see. So you think like because before we distinguished the purifying virtues from the irrational ones, we're saying the rational ones were um mixed with irrationality, but it seems that in the natural and the ethical, there's also a mix of reason and unreason. So what's special about the civic now? And yeah, it seems to be sure in all of these there's a mixture, but in some sense in the natural, the mixture is potential. They're just dispositions. They're things that will agree with reason, and in the ethical, the um reason is external in some sense to the virtues. That would be, yeah. So, okay, whereas then in the political, reason is internal, but it's still, of the soul body count compound. It's not exclusively concerned with itself.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Maybe the contrast will be clearer with 141.
Right. Okay. It's like what we would call a reasonable person is a political virtue or civic virtue.
Yeah.
Um, and okay, so now 141. Let's do the fourth one. 141. Above them. Oh no, I was saying is like all these levels of reason are like really levels. That's what I was saying, like kind like who questions of who the who is, right? Like
Right.
here
Yeah.
we're calling reason something like the soul, uh
Right.
separate soul.
Yeah.
Okay. Um Above them are the purifying virtues, which belong only to reason. But so it's still not the contemplative and so on. But to reason insofar as it withdraws from everything external into itself, discards the instruments as useless, and restrains the activities that depend on them. They deliver the soul, this like pure virtues. They deliver the soul from the bonds of Genesis, generation. The main passage dealing with them is the present one, so the Phaedo.
Phaedo, and especially this beginning of the Phaedo. So, and also this passage, 60C5, 69C3. We've read this text before, just as it like when we were looking at the background of Plotinus, because it's this passage where um, Plato criticizes what he calls servile virtues, right? Which is you're just exchanging pleasures for pleasures and pains for pains, and the Damascus will comment on this in a bit after he's done his survey of all the levels of virtue. And so there in Plotinus, I was just bringing in like sources in Plato to think that there's many levels of virtue, there are many kinds of virtue, right? And sometimes there's like fake virtue, and there's real virtue, there's political virtue, and there's purificatory virtue. So that's like also more specifically the passage that he's mentioning. It's like this passage here. Instead, not just the whole Phaedo, although the whole Phaedo is supposed to be about the purificatory life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this thing about the discarding the instruments is useless and restrains the activities that depends on them. So again, so it has to do with wanting to die, and now you're doing things that actively like you fast so that you are actively less hungry, and um uh of course there's the other motivation for fasting that you because you want to feel the hunger and that's like good for you and things like that. Here it would be like you fast in order to like really get yourself used to eating less, and you don't need to take care of your body that much and things like that. Because we saw right that Porphyry talked about this like yeah, like pain itself is not something good, like in itself good, right? So the point isn't to suffer. The point is just for you not to pay attention to the body. So you deny yourself things because those are excesses that are distracting you and so on. You have to be careful not to, as it were, go overboard. And then, if you're busy feeling all these sensations of I'm super tired and I'm super hungry and things, then like you're not purifying yourself. Um, yeah, the delivering the soul from the bonds of Genesis, that's the whole Dionysian thing of this dialogue, right? So Dionysus is the one who delivers from bonds. Um, yeah, and I guess it also has to do then with also getting rid of attachments, so also discarding memory of uh, things that bind you to the body. Um, Yeah, and so I think you're right that, in all these things we can say reason and mean the rational soul. Right. So also like when we say that in the civic virtues, he distinguishes reason from prudence and the cognitive faculty, it's because reason here means the rational soul.
Hmm. Okay. Um, where am I? So, okay.
142.
Yeah, okay. So, and the point that these belong to reason, but also to reason in the like act of withdrawing to itself and discarding everything that doesn't belong to itself. Not on reason as in what it does by itself, which will be the next thing.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So now 142, beyond these are the contemplative virtues. When the soul is finally abandoned, even itself. That would be a way of saying it. Or rather, as he's also uncomfortable with this abandoning itself, has joined the superior, um, which is like really, really becoming itself, something like that. Not in the way of knowledge only, as the word might seem to suggest, like the word contemplation, right? But in the way of appetition as well. It is as if the soul aspires to become intelligence instead of soul. So there's aspiration. And intelligence is both cognition and appetition. This is something we already discussed sometimes. I remember. They are the counterpart of the civic virtues. The action ish, what did it say? Of the latter is directed on the inferior and proceeds by reason. So the civic ones, while the contemplative virtues are directed on the superior and proceed by intellection. Plato treats of them in the Theaetetus. We saw that passage also, right? This is the so there's like turns out that like purifying is like in this weird state between the political and the contemplative. Like contemplative is where the soul is looking to the higher things. Political is where the soul is looking for the middle things, and contemplative is where the soul is looking to itself. Right?
Contemplative, it looks looking to the higher, political to the lower, and purificatory to itself.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so we talked this about this is like very Damascian, right? This emphasis that theoretical and contemplative includes also a desiderative part, a part to do with aspiration and desire, and so his emphasis that nous also has both, and well, you can see that news has both in a couple of ways. One way is like in the elements we saw that news just doesn't just make itself known, doesn't just produce knowledge, it also produces being. And he has that thing that whenever it thinks, it creates, and whenever it creates, it thinks. It always does both hand in hand. And you can think of the thinking as actually like willing something, and so there's like this erecting part. You can also think of nous as subordinate to the henats, right? Subordinate to the good. And in that sense, there's also a desiderative part of nous. Like nous, this also goes back to the original idea meaning of nous is like the knowledge that distinguishes the virtuous man, so he knows what to do. Um, so yeah, so like in a text that we'll get to later, if we continue on this virtue kick, which I'm fine to continue, there are more texts. In Practice on Providence, he says like, well, the purificatory virtues correspond to mathematics and the contemplative to dialectics, right? So in some sense, um, the soul in doing mathematics and purificatory, so it's abstracting, it's removing all the perceptible, let's say, like irrelevant information. It's just knowing what it can know on its own. But there's also a sense where, it's just getting to know itself. So it's entirely there's less of an idea of like that this will transform you into something else, right? It's just makes you more you. Um, Whereas the contemplative virtues dialectic, you're supposed to understand things like what is the world, what is justice, and when you understand a form, you're not just understanding some abstract essence, the concept in your soul. You're understanding, as it were, a system in the world that like maintains justice for everyone, or maintains everyone healthy, or makes sure that there are always horses. Um, and you understand yourself as a part of that system because I mean these systems are universals. I mean even the horse making system has to do with us because we ride horses, we breed horses, we become horses if we don't take care. So there's some suggestion where where you become the object of knowledge, and the object of knowledge is something separate from you that you unite with. Whereas the purifying virtues, you already are that. You already are this. Uh, you already have these innate a priori concepts. Um, so that seems to be this distinction with the contemplative virtues, and also why the contemplative is not just about knowledge, um, it's also about, it's also a virtue. It has to do with the will. So, we call a reasonable person someone who has the political virtues, basically. The Someone with purifying virtues is an ascetic, right? And an ascetic nerd, let's say. It's like they're entirely dedicated to mathematics or something like that. That's what they spend their time doing. Um, the contemplative person, they they are still an ascetic, but they are somehow involved with the world. Why? Because they're involved with the principles of the world, right? So they have this aspiration that they want to. So I guess it's actually something like the purifying virtues. You could be an astronomer and a mathematician, just doing the calculations. Whereas the contemplative person, they're already doing astrology. And they're seeing how, this all, you know, this is the system of fate that I'm a part of, and I follow fate, and things like that. Of course, the political person can also do that. The political person can be a Stoic philosopher, and he can say, I'm just doing my duty in the city and all that. But the contemplative person, in some sense, says, I want to be, as it were, to know exactly what fate wants and to do it, and not just like trust that the world is rational and accept the things that happen to me, but actually, in some sense, see the planning of the world, right, and participate in that. So you teach about politics and astrology and things like that. I think that's some sense of the contemplative. Like speaking it in this way, it's partially like this already shows how there's a natural motion, like continuity between the contemplative and what we'll call the hieratic or the theurgic. Because in the theurgic, then you start, you do prayers and you do rituals to, as it were, influence the government of the world. Here you don't influence the government of the world yet. You're just part of it, but like So like here you're a bureaucrat. In the with the theurgic virtues, you become something like a politician. Um, and that seems to be uh something of the contrast here.
So it turns out that I mean, in a weird way, it turns out that the contemplative, which is like higher or more separate from the body, um, is more involved in the world, so to speak. Just not the world that everyone else is involved with, but like the causes of the world or the principles of the world, which of course are the principles of the world. So they are
Yeah.
real. But
So yeah,
the
yeah.
purification seems like just a stage then to be like purification is like what you need to pass through in order to be able to like care about the contemplative things or something like that.
Yeah, I mean this is a like a trait in a since the Plotinus text, right? There's this idea that purification is just a stage on the way to contemplation. And in Plotinus on the way to identifying yourself with nous, with your daimon, and saying, "This is me." Um, Having that inversion of perspective, where suddenly you're not looking up to your daimon as, this is my God, and he's pure, and he wants me to do this and that, but like, oh no, I am divine. Things like that. So like since Plotinus, there's this thing like this slipperiness about the purificatory stage. Although, if we think about this in terms of levels of reality, so the political has to do with the embodied soul, and the purgatory with the soul, with a separate soul, and contemplative with nous. And of course, nous runs the world, but soul also governs the world. So there's a sense in which the purificatory person is also, in some sense, more in touch with reality than um, and more involved with the world than the political person. The political person is involved with the with like the rules of his city and being a good person in his city. The purificatory person, he thinks of himself as a soul, soul that in principle, and soul governs all that is not animate, right, according to the Phaedrus. And you see this, for instance, in vegetarianism. So in vegetarianism, you're somehow like recognizing transmigration and recognizing that, soul does, doesn't just rule human beings. It's not just a matter of the city or even of like all of humanity. It's a matter of the um like all the different animals. So there's a sense in which the purificatory is like more in the world, but it's a world that most people don't see. It's this world of souls and stuff. And then the contemplative is even more in the world because then he's acting according together with nous, together with the demiurge. Um, so so then that's about like the creation and sustenance of the world. Yeah. So so there we could see this as progressive. Although also since he makes the point about, there's this mirroring of the um civic and the contemplative, we can also think of it as it were as like the going out of the cave and coming back in. So we go out with the purificatory, and then we start returning with the contemplative, and then we totally return with the hieratic, because then we're like helping others with our rituals and prayers. But how about we leave that to next time, the last two, because they're like more complicated, the archetypal and the hieratic.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so the next week is the 22nd. Is that okay?
I think so. What's going on? Nothing. The point of the contempt. So right, that's what I said already. Like all these things are like have something like what we would say like something when we say something like the life of contemplation versus like the active life. we usually think of something like passive versus active. But if this like appetite thing is trying to say that the contemplation is more active than the active life, so called.
Yeah. And in a sense, the active life is, um, he's a large part of his life is managing and responding to external elements, whereas the contemplative person is more in control of his whole life, and and so he's more of an agent. Um, Although you like the passive thing is how you get formulations like when the soul has finally abandoned even itself, right? And so it's just the vehicle of nous, right? Something like that. So yeah. But we'll pick up on this next time.
Right. No, just
Okay.
like there's like this thing where we would say the philosopher, like, or the who lives the contemplative life is just someone that wants to sit in his chair and think about things and not do things. And then the philosopher would say, no, you're just a person who just accepts everything. It's like you're a slave. You just believe what you're like believe what you're told is like a really low like way of saying that, but like
Oh,
accept what is as like, yeah, it makes sense. But I'm like the one that doesn't accept it. I want it to really make
yeah,
sense.
like you just trust that the world is just. I'm like I I'm seeing what makes the world just.
Mm.
Well, this is like Hegel, right? Hegel says that, like philosophy of history is, as it were, the justification of God before the world. So he's seeing he's there, the bureaucrat who's he sees all the stamps that show that, God is working well here and things like
Mhm.
that.
Okay.
Okay. This was
Nice.
really fun.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll see you
Maybe
next
we'll
week.
be good next week. Yeah.
Yeah. Bye.
Okay. Bye bye.